Good afternoon, everybody.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Well, we didn't mean to interrupt your lunch, but I figured that perhaps as you enjoy your meal, you can listen in to the lunchtime panel. We have a great panel lineup for this afternoon with executives and specialists and technologists, basically trying to span a very good cross-section of our industry. Before I get started, though, with the panel, what I would like to do is I would like to give Elaine Stafford a huge round of applause and thanks. Yeah, Elaine has curated our Subsea Day here at PTC, and she's done a phenomenal job. So thank you for that, Elaine. So we had two great sessions this morning. We talked about everything that's happening in the subsea industry. And there's lots of growth. I mean, our cable manufacturing facilities are full. There's lots of new systems. There's excitement. There's projects. There's a lot of these things going on. And yet we're starting to see some signs of our industry where you can actually question the health of our industry. We're seeing large turnkey systems suppliers being divested. We see that access to capital to lay new infrastructure is difficult. We actually see an aging population in our industry, and not necessarily a bunch of brand new young talent, passive talent coming back, let's say, to the subsea industry and others. And so the question really is, and what we're going to try to address during the panel today, is what's really the health of the submarine cable industry. So with that said, what I would like to do is I would want to thank our panel for taking the time to being here, and let's start with brief introductions. So I'm going to go over to you. Ladies first. Amy, if you could please briefly speak who you are, what you do, and what you represent, and you're passionate about. We go down the line.
Oh, what I'm passionate about is not short, but my name is Amy Marks, and I'm the CEO of Excite Modular. We are a design builder of modular critical infrastructure buildings, including cable landing stations and edge and micro data centers. And I'm very passionate about inclusion and diversity in the industry. And actually, we're quirky puzzle solvers. That's what I'm really passionate about, solving problems.
Elizabeth?
Hi, everybody. Elizabeth Rivera-Hartling. I'm a subsea optical network engineer from Facebook. Been in the industry for about 10 years now, since the early days of Coherent. I was with Sienna for most of that time, and I just joined Facebook 8 months ago, basically building the network of the future now.
Excellent, thank you. So let me go to you, Fred. Let's come down the line.
My name is Frederick Choi. I'm the Chief Commercial Officer of a company called PCCW Global. For those who are not that familiar with, we are actually part of Hong Kong Telecom. So Hong Kong Telecom, roughly in terms of top lines, is about $4 billion US, and the international side, i.e. PCCW Global, is about a quarter of it, because as you can imagine, the Hong Kong market is fairly small. So that's why from the HKT perspective, we put a lot of emphasis to expand the market, cannot be in Hong Kong, because Hong Kong is quite restricted. So worldwide, and that's the reason why PCCW Global was formed.
Bruce?
Good afternoon, Bruce Nelson-Watts. I'm Managing Director at Global Main Systems Limited. We're effectively a ship owner. We own ships around the world that install and maintain fiber optic cables.
Lee?
Yeah, hi, Lee Frame, currently with Xtera. In the last millennium, I was with ASN. I was with them for a few decades, so moved from one turnkey system vendor to another. That's my background.
Hi, I'm David Coughlin. I am CEO of Subcom. I am returning to that position after a few years working elsewhere outside of the industry. I started in this industry back in 2001, left for a brief period in 2014, and very glad to be back.
Welcome, Dave. Ian?
Good afternoon, everybody. Ian Clark. I'm the Vice President of Global Submarine Sales at Sienna. We're also the host sponsor for SubOptic this year in New Orleans. And passion-wise is driving this business and industry and having fun at the same time.
Oh, excellent. Very good. Well, thank you, ladies and gentlemen. One thing I had forgotten to mention is that right at the end of our panel, I'm going to invite Alice Shelton to come up and actually present the roundtables that we're going to be hosting at the upcoming SubOptic in New Orleans, and then we're going to have Ruggieri come up and give us a quick update on the SubOptic Association. So that said, let's get the show on the road. So I'm actually going to pick on Dave real quick, since you just came back. You know, how do you see our industry, and what excited you to actually return to the industry, and where do you see the future of our industry going?
Well, that's a lot of different questions. I'll try to hit them quickly. You know, I think first and foremost, I came back because I always had a passion about this industry and the people in it, and especially, there's a big group of them sitting here, the people I get to work with every day at SubCom. They were a big part of why I came back. But you know, if you look at beyond that, the real reason was, as you build out these projects, and these are some of the most exciting and important projects in the world, sure, there are times that it becomes adversarial between the supplier and the customer, but the truth of the matter is you're on the same team trying to do something that's very hard, and that brings profound change to everywhere it goes. And you know, I had a great job at a great company that I left to come back here. Really liked the people there, but this is an industry that changes the world, and it's great to be part of that. I think one quick observation of what changed since I left. When I joined in 2001 as then general manager of what was called TE SubCom at the time, it wasn't even called that yet, that was a few names ago. I was 34 years old, and people like Lee and I were the young guard coming in, and many of the people I see at the table here, you know, we were the young guard coming in. And I think one of the areas that we didn't do as well as we probably could have in retrospect throughout that time period and up till now is, you know, looking at it coming back with a fresh set of eyes and a few decades on me, is we haven't necessarily built that next young guard to take over from us as aggressively as we should have, as aggressively as we could have. I think we got tied up in the doing of the job and didn't necessarily give back as much as we could have to that next generation. And that's something I think, you know, certainly at SubCom, I want to make a priority for us to rectify. In some areas, we've done a very good job of that. I would say our Marine team's done a very good job of that. But, you know, to me, this is one of the handful of big issues that will affect the industry in the long term.
Yeah, I think the industry remains, even today, one of the best kept secrets.
Yeah.
You know, I always said that you never go to a careers talk at your school, get told, why do you join the submarine cable industry? It just never happens. Nobody knows about it. I think, you know, maybe that will change a little with the prevalence of the OTTs in the industry, who are, at least by reputation, predominantly staffed by younger folk, at least younger than you know, perhaps this industry. But I think there is a real issue in the regeneration. And how do we attract people? How do we let them know about us? And the fact that it is an industry you can be passionate about.
You really can.
Yeah.
And actually, that's one of the, I think, one of the key topics. If I were to have to say what is the one thing that I think is broken that needs to be fixed in our industry is the human capital area. And we're going to talk about that a lot more during the panel, but I agree with you 100%. And I think that's one where we need to focus on, and we're going to have Amy talk about that a little bit later as part of her working groups and why Liz joined the industry and so on. But, let me just open a quick parenthesis with, you know, Valley just joined us from Google. Thanks for joining the panel, Valley, and he'll talk a little bit later on about some ideas that he has regarding training. But let me stick to the subject of where we are as an industry, investment in the industry. And it's actually a rather complex industry. And I'd like what you said, Dave, before, that you really need to work in partnerships. You're jointly trying to solve problems. So let me go to the deepest part of the industry and jump over to you, Bruce. You have one of the largest fleets that is servicing, let's say, the submarine cable industry around the world. How do you see things? I mean, it's not only us that is aging, but your fleet's aging.
Great question. I stood up here last year and I said the age of our cable ships is not an issue. It's not an issue today, but over the next 5 years, I think we're probably going to see double digits of ships retiring, certainly in the 35 to 40 year age bracket. And the issue then becomes the cost of maintaining those ships. From a cable owner's perspective, if you're going out there and asking service providers to come up with the cheapest possible price, that comes at a level of quality where you might have to pay for an older ship. And whilst a lot of the ship owners are pretty competent out there, you have a lot of legacy systems on a ship which become more and more difficult to maintain. So it's not a question of if those ships break down, it's a question of when those ships break down. So we then get onto the situation of how can we create an environment where we invest in those ships. I think to Elaine's point earlier on about the cyclicality in our industry, and go to telegeography and ask their view of the market, we've probably at best got a 2-year view of the market. If you invest in a ship, which is a 25-year, $75, $80 million investment, go into a bank and say, okay, I want to invest in a vessel. They'll ask you, what's it for? And I say, well, it's for construction. And say, well, okay, well, can you show me your backlog? I say, well, I haven't got any backlog. And they say, okay, well, have you got any maintenance? And I say, well, okay, I've got a 5-year maintenance contract. So absolutely fantastic. We'll support you. What they'll then do is say, well, who's your counterparty? Have you got a high counterparty risk? Have you got a low counterparty risk? They look at your contracts and say, okay, what's this termination for convenience clause in it? After 6 months. So it's a really, really difficult environment. You imagine the downturn we had back in 2005. There's about $16 billion worth of bad debt, related to shipping out there, and it doesn't matter whether you've got a container ship, an oil tanker, a dive boat, or a cable ship. They're all now seen as toxic assets. So trying to persuade banks, no different trying to build a system. Trying to persuade banks that backing a new ship is a good idea is incredibly difficult.
Yeah, bankers have long-term memories, right? And in particular, those that lost a lot of cash during the bubble burst, right? Yeah. What's the value of a ship? I mean, if you would have to make an investment, what are you talking about?
It's $75 to $80 million, thereabout. But again, the question is, what sort of ship do you build? Do you build a big ship? Do you build a medium ship? All our cables, you can have a cable that goes transatlantic. You have a lot of it in deep water. You have a lot of it in shallow water. So if you want to, do shallow water repairs, you need a smaller ship, a cheaper ship. If you want to do transatlantic, deep water, you need a bigger ship. But then there's back to the point about human capital. If you look at the average age of seafarers that we have on a ship, it's Dave's team, my team, a lot of long-serving captains, senior officers who have got 20 years plus in the industry. And if you can imagine, every ship needs 2 teams. A lot of our seafarers do time on and time off. So if I need to build a ship or convert a ship, it's anywhere between a 12-month time life for conversion, 2 years to build a new ship. You've then got to try and find, particularly if you're trying to expand, you've then got to try and find a team of seafarers that have got that 20 years of experience, and it's incredibly challenging. Mm-hmm. The other issue you've got is that a lot of the millennia out there so used to being connected to Facebook, being online 24/7, to then suddenly say, well, do you want to come away to sea? And you lose all that connectivity. It's incredibly challenging to attract that new talent offshore.
And so let me stick a little bit to the predictability that you're mentioning before. So obviously, if you're going to go out and ask for money for an investment, you got to show a banker says, look, here's my backlog, or here's my forecast, and et cetera. But we heard before that we hadn't had as many builds in the industry as we've had in the last couple of years, and let's say the forecast looks very good. Is that not enough? Or or if you can use also an example of other industries where investors feel more comfortable, let's say, in deploying capital for tonnage.
I think the other aspect, the other problem that compounds the issue of investment is the phasing a lot of these new systems. You know, some of the latest telegeography data we've probably seen something like 100,000 kilometers of cable systems announced. You know, how many of those systems are actually going to get financing, how many are actually going to go in? And to Kent's presentation earlier, a lot of these systems now are getting hit with permit delays. So if you try and time your asset builds around these systems coming online, it slips a quarter, and you know, you then into inclement weather, you then miss another quarter. Having a ship standing around fully crewed with no work, that's a massive cash burn for any business.
I think there's an interesting thing, which, although in theory it's hard to convince financiers, investors and so on of the merits of this industry, on the supply side, when you look across this table, and ASN's not here, but the same is true. In fact, the supply side of the industry is almost entirely in the hands of private equity, or about to be. And yeah, I'm not sure that they've leapt in because it's such a great business. I think it's perhaps the other way around. And you say, well, what is it about the supply side of this industry at the moment where the margins are so poor that industrial companies, traditional industrial companies, are not interested in hanging on to the supply divisions? I think there's a real question there for the industry.
Lee, and I agree with that point. I think if you think of the supply side itself, right, I think the fact that the OTTs have jumped into the business and the fact that they're really looking for a cost or cost plus model or minus model, et cetera, they've been squeezing, let's say, the suppliers, right? Some of us have benefited from that, let's say, process, right? Riding their coattail. But the reality is, if you squeeze too much and you suck the bone marrow out of the suppliers, right, what is left to innovate? I mean, what is left to, you know, spend perhaps in new ships or greener ships or in technology or et cetera? So,
yeah.
Dave.
Please, if I may. You know, far be it for me to come up here and, you know, publicly complain, and that's not what I'm doing, so please don't take it that way. I think we've lulled ourselves into a false sense of security as an industry. Most of the world's fleet of ships are either fully or largely depreciated. We have a lot of runway on our ships, you know, 10 plus years of our ships. So, you know, this has empowered people to look at things like variable costing, and I don't think anybody's looking at, you know, what does my profit level have to be so that I would build a ship, let alone whether a bank would finance it. I mean, just being transparent, if you look in the maintenance world right now, it's basically a break-even industry, not counting for being able to replace the ship at the end. So you see the older tonnage rolling into maintenance. And you look at the construction side, and while there's a lot of demand out there, there is not enough profit in that frankly anybody would build a new set of tonnage right now. So it's up to us as suppliers to be more efficient and figure out how to, you know, I don't see, you know, any passion plea up here getting people to say, hey, you know, I'm going to go the other way. I'm going to pay more for what I got yesterday. So it's about how can we be more efficient? How can we share risk so that enough money is generated to invest in more tonnage in the future? We're going to invest in the human capital no matter what, but, you know, some of the innovation that's required beyond just follow-on innovation, some of the breakthrough innovation throughout the years, coherent, other things, those cost a lot of money. So, you know, it's about us as an ecosystem. How can we create some balance here? Maybe share risks. How can we as suppliers become more efficient to generate enough money to make this a worthwhile investment?
And I think that's basically where I was trying to lead to with not just focusing on the marine side of things, but in general across, let's say, across the industry. I mean, Ian, you know, Sienna hasn't been in our industry that long, and yet you have about 62% or more of market share in the optical systems, right? Yep. But you're also feeling the crunch. So you want to comment about the evolution and so on?
I think our industry's evolved anyway in terms of open cables. I think that's beneficial. It helps to share the R&D costs across the different verticals of building a complete system. And if you can leverage a certain technology, be it terrestrial or be it subsea, so you can get a greater return on that R&D you're doing, then that's obviously the right way to go. there'll always be subtle differences in technology, be it, you know, trying to go 17,000 kilometers across the Pacific versus a DCI interconnect of 25 kilometers at lowest cost per bit, trying to go there. But trying to reuse R&D and insight as much as you can to get that return on investment is a great thing. If we look over the last 10 years, we've seen a massive change in who builds which ones at which parts of the ecosystem. So, you know, you've seen the evolution of the traditional, I'll say, terrestrial optical players. So you see Ciena's certainly there. You see Infinera, you see Huawei, who bluntly wouldn't have been in the subsea system 5-10 years ago, right? So we're seeing the pop-to-pop builds, we would call it, where you're trying to use one platform, one technology to simplify and do that. And then we're relying on the specialists in the marine side and the wet plant side to go and build those networks and make them as open. And the openness drives hopefully the cost down and makes us all innovate. And we need that innovation. If you can't innovate, then you start stagnate a little bit. So that's what we see is an openness which works together. Comments?
Thank you. Just wanted to add and compliment to what Ian just said. For the duration of my career, I think I've seen a ton of innovation in this industry, which has been really awesome. From the genesis of coherent technology, which just completely revolutionized the way that the wet plant could be designed. You know, it gave a massive boost in capacity and monetization of existing assets, but also shifted the way that the wet plants were designed in a big way. And I think that we've gotten to a point where we've really extracted a lot of that value. And you know, the modem guys have said, all right, here we are, we're at Shannon. Now what? And I think that what that's now pushing us into is okay, now we need to shift into some innovation on the wet side, so that we can, you know, take that technology and make the most of it within what's available now. And I think from an innovation standpoint, the wet plant vendors are doing a phenomenal job innovating on high fiber per count, on SDM. There's a press release that I think went out today about aluminum being commercially available now. All of this is just kind of the global shift in, we've got a massive capacity demand, you know, for Facebook specifically. We almost can't even build it as fast as we consume it. And so obviously we need to find ways to cost reduce while still keeping the supply side healthy, because there are only so many vendors out there that we can rely on to build as much as we need.
And you know, I think disruption in reality is great, because I think to some extent an industry, when it starts becoming slow and lethargic and whatever, you got to just grab that tree and shake it a little bit, right, and see what comes out of it, and really think, as Dave was saying, you were saying, you know, what is it that we can do better, different, to be more efficient or faster, or so on. But one thing that I always say is, you cannot disrupt heavy infrastructure the way you disrupt software. So where's the right place to disrupt? Where's the right place to innovate? And how are we going to pay for that innovation, right?
Can I answer?
Okay, absolutely.
You didn't actually just say how is it possible, you know, that we can't disrupt on the terrestrial side of our business? I kind of heard that. I know it's not exactly what you said. I think interesting to me, I just a quick raise of hands. How many people are in this room that are actually experts on the dry side of this business in construction, terrestrial permitting, data center construction? Raise your hand. Yeah, I just want to tell you what my life is like on a daily basis. I think 1.5 people just raised their hand. Is that astounding to you? 1.5 people in this entire industry just raised their hand. And you wonder why we are not innovating on that side of this business. And I think there's a lot of forgotten pockets within this industry that if you're an OTT and you want to see this ecosystem work, you better not just turn to the loudest, biggest, well, I'm always the loudest, but to the most prevalent skill set in the room. Because that, maybe Ian. But so
it's a very good discussion, and I want to add, and Bruce just said that ships are aging, but we all aging, and look on all of
yes.
us.
How many of you are under 35? Raise your hand. Under 30, besides Elizabeth.
Let's count. Let's count. Wait. Please hold your hands.
I was 34.
Please hold your hands, guys. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 7 of whatever, 200.
Yeah.
is less than 35.
But for the record, if you only
So
bring
it's
new people into optical, we'll have a
3.5%.
problem. Like, right? Like, my point is, if you're only going to bring marine people in and optical people in, we'll have an issue here. And I think if we're not going to open up our eyes to recognize there are lots of areas in this industry that make this ecosystem work, and if you only look to people that have a particular skill set to make them work, it won't work.
And Amy, this is a good point, but let me ask you, how old was Shannon when he actually wrote his formula? Guys, how old was Shannon? 32.
Google it.
Or more.
32. So basically, this group is out, definitely. We still have, yeah, we
It's
have
just
7
Elizabeth.
people, yes, our potential, so. And Eric, is it okay if I take 3 minutes?
That's fine. I will charge
And
you.
basically, what shall we do? So I'm actually pleased to announce that we are doing student summer school. It's a student summer school called Subsea Optical Fiber Communications. And I have flyers, enough flyers for all of us. And we have really good people who actually agreed and volunteered to become a faculty of this school. And we will have 10 lectures. And what I'm asking you is to reach students. Somebody, your own alma mater, your professor friend, you know, some very smart kids that somehow you know. Because without fresh blood, guys, we will move into nowhere. And all this innovation, you know, it is not done by somebody who is 5 years to retirement. It actually comes when new people join industry, either have no expertise or getting expertise from other fields. And then basically people who want to risk, people who actually want to innovate. So, Eric, thank you very much for the time.
And thanks, Valley, for putting that together. Let me add a little bit of color to that training. It is a sponsored training that was put together. Valley, thank you for putting it together. And I think it's this type of initiatives that we really need around the industry of saying, look, what is it that we need to do to perhaps attack one of the biggest problems that we have, which is our succession, right? And attract new people to the industry. So we're gonna talk about human capital, which is something that I'm also personally very excited about in a second, and we'll talk about the working group in that area. But let me go back to finish a subject that you guys touched upon, right? If disruption is great, and I think one of the things that led to, in our world of subsea, where we had turnkey systems vendor, one of the big trends was disaggregation of parts, right? So we're starting to see that as a trend. It's, you know, what can we do better? Some of the biggest issues that we have seen from, let's say, the carrier side, where your prices are going down to zero, from the vendor side, where the margins are very, very slim, is some of the first things that get cut is training and innovation, right? So what is it that we need to do, and what can we do better, let's say, in those fields? So let me jump on the innovation side a little bit. And Liz, you were actually leading that charge, so over to you.
Didn't I already give you my spiel on innovation? What more do you want, Eric?
I'm not going to answer that.
Just say innovation's good.
I love a woman that speaks her mind. I love this. This is fantastic. I'll sit back.
No, I think one of the things that we're driving in our industry also is the whole concept of open systems, right? And for that, Liz is leading a working group inside of SubOptic, so we can try to find some standardization. So why don't we talk about that a little bit?
That one I can give you lots on.
Well, thank you.
So one of the reasons why I'm up here is actually specifically to talk about the working group that I'm chairing on open cables. It was a SubOptic initiative, and I'm really excited to be a part of it. I have managed to cherry pick my way through the industry and pick some of the smartest people I think I've ever worked with to help me solve these problems, so I'm really excited about that. And basically, I think that the genesis of it comes from, you know, open cables has become an industry-wide accepted norm over the last few years. And, you know, SubOptic 2016, there was a lot of conversations on it. And following that, the ITU initiated a working, you know, a question to address the standards for open cables. And unfortunately, we're 3 years later and we still don't have one. And, you know, I think that it's a bit of a restrictive process, but we've still been building open cables. And so there's all of these things going on in the industry that we are doing, and we're kind of just plowing forward, but there's not a lot of convergence across the industry of how it should be done. There's still, you know, there's a lot of guidelines out there that are unknown. How do you design it? How do you spec it? Do you use OSNR or GeoSNR? And what does GeoSNR even mean? And all of these things that, that get wrapped up into that. And so one of the things that I'm hoping to do as part of this working group is to kind of get all of these big brains together and to get everybody to kind of converge and collaborate on these things. And, you know, there's been tons of publications from, you know, all the wet system vendors, from upgrade vendors, and everybody kind of has the same idea, but calls it something different and does it a little different. And, you know, it's all just physics in the end, and I think we just got to kind of agree to call it the same thing and define it the same way. And so our goal for the working group is to not only share those findings at SubOptic, but to also kind of create a set of guidelines that can hopefully help accelerate what's going on in the ITU by having some industry convergence from the players that are participating in the ITU, but in a forum that's a little bit less rigid than, and a little bit more frequent as well. So excited about that.
And who do you believe should be the custodian of those standards until we go through the certification process? Or
you know, I think SubOptic is a good forum to potentially be kind of the keeper of that. Obviously, the working group is born out of a SubOptic idea, so it's good. And I think historically, SubOptic has been a very collaborative forum, and I think that that's something that we really need. Is instead of, you know, all of these very brilliant people working in isolation of each other, and, you know, when you're competitors, it's a little bit hard to, you know, reach out to your buddy that you're competing with and, you know, say, you know, hey, why don't we just call this the same thing and measure this the same way? But with a forum like SubOptic that kind of focuses more on the academic side and the theory of it as opposed to the competitive aspects of it, it's a really good way to kind of get everybody working on the concepts without breaching, you know, competitive IP and all those things that are obviously important to protect as well.
Well, I think, you know, SubOptic was born from basically the genesis was to technical collaboration amongst, let's say, the leading vendors of those times, and I think that's one of the pieces of the glue that kept everything together, right? And in a world where you don't have the margins to perhaps spend as much in R&D, et cetera, collaborating is obviously, let's say, critical. So talking about R&D a little bit and where the money's going to come from to fund these things, I'm going to ask the panel, where do you think, what sort of things can be done to continue down this path? I mean, you've talked about a lot of things happening in the short time that you've been here, but what else do we need to do?
I mean, I'll throw that in as one of the smaller suppliers on the panel. I think we had this conversation actually out in the hallway. There are a lot of big companies out here right now that are, you know, the OTTs and some very large developers. And at the end of the day, I don't want to say innovation never comes from the big corporations, but it does often come from the very small, innovative, entrepreneurial spirit companies that are out in the marketplace. And I get it, David. They're pushing down on you. And we talked about margins, you know, being smaller and smaller. That's actually when you pull your smartest, smallest suppliers in and say, how do we make this better? How do we remove risk from these things? How do we figure out a better way to do things? How do we, and by the way, I'm not saying that you don't do this, and just in general, this is what needs to happen, right? That whether you're ASN or if you're Subcom or whomever, Xterra, that's the moment that you sort of pull people a little closer and say, like, we might need some better partners here and some more collaboration and some ways to figure out how to remove risk and add value, as opposed to, you know, the normal reaction, which is like, okay, I have more risk on me, let me push more risk on you. That's like a very, you know, stodgy, old way of dealing with problems, right? So if you look at every industry across the world that is, very innovative and making money out there. They didn't do that by beating up suppliers, right? You can only beat suppliers up so much. And probably this is a good argument for you as well, as you talk to some of your clients. They can only beat you up so much, right, till the end. So at the end of the day, if we don't, there is a Shannon limit for beating up subcontractors. I think everyone's at it.
You're close.
That was a good point. But my point is, if you look at the industries that have actually taken some disruptive technologies and really enabled those to come about, right? That's really where we see change in the industry. First, to have change, if you've ever looked at Dan Miller's formula for change, the first thing you need to have is dissatisfaction. Right? So is anyone in this industry, would you raise your hand and say, like, this industry is running completely amazingly right now and there's nothing I would change? I don't think there's anyone that would raise their hand, is there? We have to have some dissatisfaction.
But at what point in the last 30 years would anybody ever have raised their hands and said, yeah, today everything's just great?
Well, I feel like at this point there's so many people in the industry. We didn't ask people to raise their hand if they were over 55. But if I ask that question, how many of you are over 55 and kind of like, if it gets better, if it doesn't, I'm on my way out. Like, hey, that we just said, we haven't invested in the younger people. And really, if you're 60 years old, listen, 5 years ago, Frank Ray came to this, I always tell this story, he came to SubOptic 5 years ago. And for any of you who have read Clayton Christensen, The Innovator's Dilemma, who coined the phrase disruptive technology, he was my professor at Harvard Business School, and I witnessed it in real time here 5 years ago. Frank Ray stood up in this room and he said, hey guys, I'm with Microsoft right now. We're gonna want more and more cables as OTTs. You're gonna have to do, when I say more, I don't mean twice as many. I'm gonna mean like 10 times as many. And when I mean we're gonna want to build them in shorter amounts of time, I don't mean like 10% less time. I mean like half the time. And do you know what happened? Someone in this industry, I won't name names, who was probably in their late 60s at the time, stood up, and I thought, oh my God, this is the moment of disruption in this industry. Things will actually change. That person stood up in this room in front of all these people and said, Frank, that's just the way this industry is. That's the way this industry is always gonna be. I don't care how much money you have, you're not gonna change it. That's the best our industry could get at the moment in time where someone's saying we need some innovation to disrupt in this industry. That's the best we had. And I thought I fell out of my chair at that moment. And I looked around, and honestly, I thought I was gonna see a lot of shocked faces. Instead, I saw a bunch of guys going, and it is men, sorry, going like this. Yeah, you're right, Frank, it's not gonna change. Like, you can say what you want, but that's what it is.
All right, Amy, 5 years later.
5 years later, 5 years later, in reality, what's happened is, and this is my opinion, and you know this, I don't necessarily, sorry for all the OTTs, so I'm gonna make a lot of friends today, right? I think what you want to have occur, I always say it like this, there's more than one way to get in the house. You can go through the front door, you can go through the back door, you can go in the chimney, you can go through the basement. Really, right now, you're only going through one door. Everyone says this word turnkey, and we've all talked about the fact that we don't have skill set in the industry. So, in an industry that doesn't have skill set, we've just gone to the people that have the most amount of money, which now are owned by private equity, right? And we've said, okay, you don't have skill set in your big corporations, so guess what? Now you're responsible for everything, and we want this to be cheaper. So you're gonna take on all this risk that you have maybe potentially no skill set in some of it, and we want this to be cheaper. Like, that makes absolutely no sense. You will not get cheaper, you'll just get more risk, you'll spend more money, it will be longer. And unfortunately, because they don't, there's no one to really there is nobody right now to raise up their hand and be bigger, almost, right? They're just doing what they think is the easiest path, but unfortunately it's the path with most resistance. And so the results they're getting are not very good. And so we have to attack the problem. We can't just think that there's one way of getting in the house. You have to start going through the back door, right?
Panel, how do you respond to that?
I think, Eric, it's also about sustainability. And I think, all of us have got a responsibility to try and create a sustainable market moving forward. To Dave's point, margins are under pressure. We have cyclicality. We don't know if we're going to have a good year or a bad year. So you can imagine we've got all these young guys want to come into, out there looking for jobs, and we're trying to attract the best talent. Our pitches, yeah, you want to come and work for us, and the young guys say, well, okay, so where's my career development plan? Where am I going to be in 5 years? I don't even know where I'm going to be in 2 years' time. So how can you sell a decent story to those guys? So we've got to try and come up with a way of creating sustainability to attract, decent young talent into our business. And just to give you, a really good example. So because it's such a cyclical business, Global Marine became a more diversified business about 4 or 5 years ago. We're a supplier of ships and engineering services to the offshore renewables sector. We've got a business that services offshore wind turbines, and we have the telecom sector. I can go to the offshore renewables sector, and I know exactly how many cables are going in the water out to 2026 in the UK, and certainly in UK waters, European waters. There's a commitment from the government to renewables. I have no idea where telecoms is going. We take on graduates every year. The graduates we took on 2 years ago look at the telecoms business and they go, well, this isn't very sexy. I don't know where it's going in 2 years' time. They've all moved into renewables because they've got a clear path for career development. They know exactly where that sector is going over the next 6 or 7 years. And when you talk about innovation, they are innovating on a 6-monthly basis. There is a new product, a new way of doing things, a new ship design that's coming out every 6 months. It's a real sexy business. And these guys see this and see an opportunity for them to get up the career ladder much, much quicker than they do in our sector. So it's how do we create sustainability that attracts the best talent?
Yeah.
So in my view, I agree, sustainability is one thing, but I think the thing that we have around our necks individually is risk. Right? Risk is the thing that stops you innovating. Whether you like it or not, we're talking open cables, and Elizabeth talked about the open cables and the standardization of it. We're not there yet. So, we're building cables which are open, but we're still, as an industry, asking for a capacity statement on an open cable, which is not an open cable. You're asking a vendor who builds an SLTE to give somebody who's building a cable that doesn't want an SLTE to give them the commitment. That's risk that stops innovation on the wet side, right? If we can get the standardization that says you can go and build it to an SNR or an OSNR or a GeoSNR or any other 4-letter, 3-letter acronym we can get to that we all are happy with, that takes risk away from the wet plant guys, opens it up for everybody else, and then we play again on the optics side, right? So we're taking risk away from what you don't control, and you're putting the risk on the people who do control it, and then we'll start to innovate a little bit more. And we've got to get a standardized one somehow, whether it sits in SubOptic, whether it sits in another body, that helps us get to level playing fields where you can innovate under control.
Yeah, first of all, I agree with what you said, and that's a good example. There are a number of items that Amy said that I'll focus on the ones that I agree with. And I didn't grow up in this industry. I mean, I joined this industry when I was 34, but where I think she is profoundly correct is, while this industry has a lot of innovation around how to send an optical signal 11,000 kilometers, it is an industry that is remarkably resistant of change. And I think that's really what...
Yes.
What you were talking about, change.
Conservative.
Yes, change of business processes, change of how things are done. And when I think of us as a turnkey supplier, our biggest risk areas are the pieces we don't do, not the pieces we do. Sure, weather's a big risk. In some places we go in pirate-infested waters, that's a risk. But the thing we spend the most time worrying about is the parts that we don't normally do, and then we make a decision, insource that or outsource that. Risk, and then the final thing I'd say on this is the other oddity that struck me coming back is we spend an inordinate amount of time on the contracts arguing about the parts that are the pennies, not the thousands and millions of dollars. And people get stuck in their positions on things that frankly, I think are detrimental to the project as opposed to trying to move the project along. So I think, when I said, innovative about the balance of risk and how we do things together, that's a lot about, how we manage suppliers, where the line stops, of who does what to whom, but also about, what is the expectations on the contract going through to the final end. You hit a perfect point of that. Yep. Right now we do, you think open cable saves us a bunch of money. It doesn't. We do all the same testing. We build line cards and bring them out and do fat testing just in case these guys can't. Yep. So that's a case where we have a great idea. We were one of the early proponents of open cables, but it hasn't evolve to the point where it's actually benefiting the industry in a clear and demonstrable way. I think it is to really smart companies that have gotten comfortable using this, but a first-time cable operator, open cables isn't a big benefit yet.
Right.
Just to add to what David said, that's exactly the intention of the working group. Is that there are a number of companies who have built quite a few open cables, are building them, and are very comfortable with saying, I know what this spec is going to translate to with Sienna, with any other modem vendor out there. I've got a pretty good idea, and I know my risk tolerance. But I don't think that's as well understood universally. And in order to get that kind of broad adoption, that means that you can build every cable in the same way with the same amount of risk added or removed. We need to come to some kind of an industry agreement. And those kind of guidelines that will help someone who hasn't built an open cable before is exactly what I'm hoping to get out of the working group. So.
No, I totally understand.
So we've talked a lot about the supply side for a second. So I wanted to give Fred perhaps a chance. If we think of an operator, right? And we think, what does the operator need? Or perhaps even what does the OTT need as a user of the technology? And what can we do different?
Basically, I think Bruce brought up a very good point about this sustainability of the industry. I mean, the way I look at it is, in order for the submarine cable industry to sustain, there must be the needs, right? Because we are a service provider, and in the last 18 months ago, since the past 18 months, I would say, there are more and more companies coming to PCCW and ask us to help to build cable systems. So I see the demands there. And I just want to quote one or two examples. Now, on a worldwide basis, there are 49 landlocked countries. And in Africa itself is 15. So bear in mind now, these countries, before that, they don't have access to any submarine cable systems, right? But if there are infrastructure within that country with the neighboring countries, i.e. can access to the sea, improved. So which means that we are, in general, for the industry, can unlock another 49 countries around the world, and that is demand. And I think we also do not need, cannot ignore that kind of demands in the worldwide industry.
Can I add one thing to that? I think I'm still astounded by the 1.5 people. One might be my business partner that raised their hand on the dry side. But you realize what you just said, what we're seeing on our side, on the dry side of the business, is more and more technology is needed. So I know we're all talking about number of cables, and we can do 16 now, and we're trying to, that. But I'm sure if any of you wander to the other side of this conference, you'll notice, and what you just said, these cable stations, the ones that we're building right now, are becoming more hybrid cable station data centers. Or we're building a cable station and they also want us to build a data center. Or it's sometimes a pop directly to the data center, of course. But more often than not, like last year and the 2 years before, everyone's like, oh, we're just going to never have a cable landing station ever again. And I'm like, really? Because we're getting bigger and more difficult, complex designs for cable stations and data centers. So now knowing that there is no one in this industry that is morphing into that space, obviously, and bringing them in, we have no one here that actually is good at that, with very few exception. We have to start investing in some of these places. I can tell you Africa, we get tons of calls for data center hybrids in Africa or edge data centers, even in the US for hundreds of edge data centers that need to be built. And they're coming through this industry as we are the entree into these emerging markets or underrepresented markets. And we have almost zero skill set in it. Like I imagine in my head there's a boat, if you've ever seen this cartoon, and there's a hole and water's coming up, and we may have the OTTs at the top, or whoever's making money, I don't know who that is anymore, but maybe they're at the top going, the air up here is great, this boat ride is fantastic, and then as we go down the boat, everyone's sort of bailing out, and they're like, this is the worst industry in the world, right? So we're all on this same boat together. And if one area goes down, whether that's the wet side, or even if we can't actually get to this digital convergence side on going terrestrial, what are we building these for? Where eventually someone is going to disrupt this space, like Frank said, and they'll figure out a smarter, faster way to do this. Or other, by the way, we partnered this year with a $28 billion company to do more turnkey in our business because we kept having the system suppliers say, well, you only build the building. We need you to do permitting. We need you to do site work. We need you to do all these things. So we said, we look around in the industry, there was no one there to help. So we looked to our background in the conventional construction world and said, we need to find a partner for this because there's no one here raising up their hand to do it, and we're going to have to start bringing in new people, right? If we don't, we're going to look around and the people will retire and there'll be 6 people in this room next time, and some other technology will figure out how to do this.
So let me stay on the business side briefly before we jump into human capital, right, which is great. But you know, changing is very, very difficult, right? And we tend to predict or forecast in a linear way. That's what we were taught all our lives. But we're in front of an exponential growth of data. And we really need to understand what that means. So from the vendor side, the technology side, et cetera, but also as an operator, whether it's an OTT or whether it's a carrier, we need to say, okay, what does this really mean to us? Because you need to really have some of that predictability in place so that you can justify the investment, so you can do those things. I think Valley and Fred wanted to add to that.
Yeah, I joined Google 12 years ago, and I see how traffic grows. First 3 months, I told myself, this is crazy, this will not go more than 6 months. After 6 months, 9 months, you see the same. After a couple of years, I actually gave up once I started to see how Facebook started to grow a couple of years later. So it's obviously a new life. And what this industry is trying to do is basically to address what computers give us, and all this exponential growth is due to computers. That's right. So on one axis, we have what computer basically give us. And we are trying to solve this problem with pure human intervention. So how many people here work with machine learning? How many people kind of do daily work with machine learning? Any hands? And the whole world is doing machine learning. Look, so many startups. Yep. And you think we are just in the different industry, but you know, there are driverless cars. So why don't we have driverless ships? And why don't we basically do machine learning in network operations and basically do basically simplification? Because when you have exponential formula on one side, you have to address the x part of your equation, and the only way basically is to address it with computers. So we clearly need computers take care of capacity that computer give us. Otherwise, we basically we will be killed.
But I also think, Valley, that it's not just how do you automate certain things or how do you add intelligence to it, et cetera. It's the willingness of the people that are in the industry to recognize that things are changing, that they have to change,
yeah,
and that you embrace change, right?
Yeah, I agree and disagree.
And that's very difficult. And even in the business world, so if you look, for example, at the business models themselves, right, there's some that are operating the same models they've done for 100 years. I think what we, for example, did as a company is we recognized that, let's say, entities like a Facebook or a Google that used to be my customer's customer became my customer, became my partner, potentially a competitor. And we said, look, you have to work together, right? And I think what's hard of working together, for example, between an OTT and a carrier, it's very simple. You have on this side an entity that is looking for the lowest cost per bit. You have on this side of the spectrum an entity that wants to make money, right? So that you're totally in opposite directions. So where is the playing ground? What can we do? This entity over here needs terabytes or petabytes of capacity. We need something different. Finding that mix is not easy, but I think it's through calibration partnerships that eventually you will get there. No? And we just need to be reconcile with the fact that things are changing and then see how this eventually goes throughout the world. No?
But Eric, let me finish answer to your question. Basically, we have exponential growth on y-axis, and we need to address this other axis. And this is what we actually did last 10 years with coherent objects. We moved from 10G 0.3 bit per second per hertz to 1 bit per second per hertz to 4, 5 bit per second per hertz. But we basically are done. There is another generation, so we basically could get 50% something improvement, but we definitely need new technologies to basically address the growth. This space division multiplexing, which is most sexy kind of in 2019, is a way to address, but that is for 2, 3, 4 years. So we clearly need new horizons, how we address this exponential growth, because it's not going to stop.
So on that subject, I mean, obviously we need to bring in fresh blood into the industry, right? And so let me switch over to the human capital part of our panel. And Amy, I'm going to lead it off with you. You're running a diverse inclusion and diversity working group at SubOptic. So let's talk about people for a second.
Yes, so when they asked me to take over the working group and start out the working group for inclusion and diversity, I thought this is fantastic. Like, this is what I've been talking about for a long time. And I realized there are a lot of other people that are very passionate about that, which has been fantastic. So Bruce is actually on our committee. We have a really phenomenal group of people that have come together. We're also looking for others, so if you want to be represented on that working group, we are actually actively seeking other members. And it was interesting. We got together, and the first thing that happened is people said, I want to do these programs at these universities. I want to do these things with women. We're going to go out and first we said, wait a minute. Like, first we should figure out, are we actually doing as badly as we think we're doing? Maybe we're doing worse. Maybe we're doing better. I don't know. I sit in rooms lots of times where I recognize the 5 other women that are in this industry usually. But maybe there's lots of other women that work behind the scenes that we just don't know about, that don't come to these events. So we said, let's do a benchmark survey. Let's really understand where we stand as an industry. Where do we stand compared to other industries, which Bruce is actually taking over some of the benchmarking conversation. And where do we want to get to as an industry? So once we thought about that, we said, let's do a survey before we do any programs to attack a problem that we're not sure which problem we're attacking, right? So we will be, and we are currently putting together a survey that if you would like to participate, which we encourage everyone in this room, the companies to participate in, we'd like to understand what's important to you in diversity and inclusion, what programs you might currently have, what incentivizes your company to want to be more diverse, and who's actually, and if you're doing nothing in it, we want to know that too, and how diverse your company actually is at the moment. Once we gather that data, our hope is during the SubOptic conference that we can report out on that data. We've actually, if you're an OTT in the room, we've reached out to a lot of the OTT's supplier diversity programs. Let me say that again. Do you know that there are supplier diversity programs at some of the big companies? That, like, raise your hand if you're a certified woman-owned business in this room. 1, 2. Raise your hand if you're a certified minority-owned business. Service disabled veteran. Great. So that's why no one ever asks me if I have a certification. But there are actual programs in big companies that are so important in this industry that need supplier diversity and want it because they recognize it's not about just getting more women or more young people. They realize that it has a capital cost to them, right, if they don't actually innovate. We are hoping to reach out to some of those supplier diversity programs, have them participate maybe with us in SubOptic, but we'd like to reveal the results of the survey at SubOptic with some targeted, bold goals for the industry that we can measure year on year and figure out, you know, how are we doing as an industry and how do we get better and have some attack programs for that. So we also, the other thing we're doing is we have a stipend of $5,000 from SubOptic that we are putting together an application process in the next few weeks for anyone that would like to try to participate in SubOptic that might be from an underrepresented country or minority group or young people or women. Anyone can actually apply. But there is a stipend available to go and participate in SubOptic to really drive that growth, and I think that's very generous of SubOptic. During the
which is not for one case.
Yes, it's for actually we could do multiple cases. So anybody 1 in 5 applicants can come. We might even split it up even smaller. And the last thing we're doing as well is we have a luncheon that we're going to be doing at SubOptic. We have one sponsor for that already, which is Xterra. So we thank Xterra for that. We are looking, and we are putting this out right now, for another sponsor to be the other half of that sponsorship. It's $3,500 for the other half. And people were actually saying, well, we need to get a sponsor. And I thought, my God, in this industry, if we can't get somebody to put $3,500 up for inclusion and diversity, we might as well just call it a day at this point. So if anyone's interested in participating in that, if we get more than one, we'll put your money to better use somewhere else. But that's what's happening on the inclusion and diversity group.
But let me go back one step, and I think, you know, Amy, thanks for that update. But I think all of us in our different companies are trying to recognize the fact that we have an issue of talent, right? We have an issue with human capital bringing people in. And so I'm going to ask you, Liz, the only one probably under, I won't say 50, 30 in the panel.
I'm under 50 for the record.
Could you share your experience? What got you excited, right? Why did you go down the path you did? And then you were on the supplier side, and now you're, let's say, on the OTT side. So share with us that transition, and let's go from there.
Okay. So I think it's a very, very good topic because, like you said, there were not that many hands that got raised in the room in the under 35 category. And one of the interesting things that I've observed being in this industry for, like I said, it's been about 10 years, which literally makes me a baby in this room from an experience perspective. It feels like a lot to me because that's my whole career. But I realize that relatively it's actually quite short. And since the very beginning, I have almost exclusively always been the youngest person in the room and often the only woman in the room in most of my meetings as well. And part of that is that it's also, I'm on the engineering side, so that's also just generally weighted even further in that direction. But the thing that's worrisome is that that is still true 10 years later. And I know that that was true at the beginning for a number of reasons, but the fact that that still tends to be the case is a highlight of the fact that it is a problem that I don't think is going away. And you know, to kind of go back to Valley's initiative on the school, I think that's the only way to get more talent is to get it young. When I did 4 years of engineering, electrical engineering, and I got out of that and I didn't even know that this industry existed. I got into Nortel at the time, which then became Sienna, which was fiber optics in general. And then that was around the time that Nortel was like, hey, let's try to get into this subsea space with our great coherent technology. But I didn't know it existed. So if university students that are going into engineering are going through entire degrees and don't even know that our industry exists, that's a huge roadblock to us getting more talent. And so there's an interception point in college where we need to get students involved in this kind of thing, and we need to show them that there is diversity in the industry as well. It's one of the reasons why I'm really excited that I'm actually participating as a lecturer in the school. But just to demonstrate, and I want university students to come in and say, see, there are women in this industry, and there are people that have not been in it that long, that it's not that overbearing for them to consider coming into it. But in addition, obviously, you have to start younger as well too. If you don't have engineers to pull from in the first place that are diverse or minorities or women, you can't build a pipeline if you don't have it start young. Yeah. And one of the interesting things about going to Facebook is that it is a younger company. So that's been really interesting, and I think that has helped to take a lot of engineers from the software side, from other sides of it, and to actually kind of bring them a little bit closer to our industry. But that's one avenue, and I know that Google kind of has the same demographic, and that's a good way to spread some of the knowledge to those that are already out of school. But I really think that it's hitting them young, and it's promoting companies to get involved in these programs early on, to support initiatives like the summer school. Yeah, I think that it's
I just want to add that Elizabeth is a faculty on the summer school, and really appreciate Elizabeth for doing this work. It takes lots of preparation and your personal time. But it's also on Elizabeth to bring a younger Elizabeth. And it's actually on you, all of you guys, because we are sponsored by Optical Society of America, we are sponsored by SubOptics organization, but it's not about money, it's really about the characters, the young generation. And we just need to give them a chance, and we all will benefit if we get young, talented people and empower them.
Dave, you had mentioned with me some...
Well, one thing I'd like to add to this. So for the past handful of years, I've been in the electronic component industry, primarily around fuses, high-power semiconductors, sensors industry. In about 7 months, I was at a forum similar to this, not in Hawaii, so it wasn't as much fun. But there was an entire panel about this exact topic. So we are way behind compared to that industry, but there are other industries that are really making this an important mission. So I would say for us, this is hypercritical because we're starting from behind. Others are recognizing they're having the problem. and they're going to be out there competing for this talent.
Yes.
So I don't think this is as simple as some other things where we can say, hey, we're going to put more effort in it and it's going to work. We're going to have to redouble our effort, measure what we did, and probably redouble our effort again, because this is a worldwide phenomenon around engineering in general.
Yeah.
I would say we're on the performing poorly side of the scale. Other people who are doing much better are judging themselves in the same spot we are, and they're going to put the effort in.
And by the way, I just to clarify one thing, this is I'm not I don't consider myself even a feminist, to be honest. This is not about we just need more women so we can look around the room and feel like we're hanging out with other women. I think if you look at, I think it's Melvin Greer, right, that spoke at Tech New York. He's actually one of the preeminent AI thought leaders at Intel, actually. And the story he told, this is about money. That's what this is about. This is about survival of the industry and money in your company. Every time they do a project, when they figured out that they had predominantly white male, older white males working on the AI project, they had tons of rework to do because they didn't have different viewpoints to make that AI the most efficient it could be. And they realized they were spending more and more money on reworking these projects that were only looked at in one particular viewpoint, that they were losing money. So we have to start looking at this, that this is about our businesses, not about the fact that I want to look across the table and see Elizabeth every day. This is about your pocket. This is about, capitalizing on this, the talent that is evaporated in this industry. We've really got to do that for the survival. We should be in crisis mode now. And I think that's a great point, David.
I think one of the things Global Marine love about graduates, and we run an annual graduate scheme, we take on 3 graduates every year, is the tenacity we see in these young guys who are coming through. I think to Dave's point, where there's a lot of inertia in the industry, there's a lot of inertia in a lot of our companies. Getting the young guys, the young people coming into the business, that have that tenacity, it keeps the well-established people on their toes. And I'm absolutely open for it, because if you don't create that environment, you're not going to create that innovation to change. And just one of the questions I want to just throw out there: how many people in this room run an annual graduate scheme? Can you put your hands up?
Annual what?
Graduate scheme. Yeah. Or they, again, to your point, Pete, they don't see a career path and they decide to move on.
So I think I would include in that, and then I'll raise my hand, is an internship program, because it's a little different here in the States. So we do a formal internship program.
And you have a women's program, right? Just I'm sticking up for you.
And we have diversity supplier.
And you have a supplier. Really? I didn't know that. Okay, good.
But it's, it's quite simple. We've got an opportunity that we all accept we want to attract new talent into the industry. So we've got a gap. And all we're saying is, why don't we put an extra little bit of effort in? There's loads of students out there. We all know which universities and colleges they go to. So there's opportunity to refresh.
Get them all.
And we're saying we want to add diversity into that discussion. It's not as though we're flush with people and we've got no way of trying to augment people out of the business to get diversity back in, right? We're short of people, we're growing, we're unfortunately all aging as well at the same time, and we're just thinking, think diversity when we're trying to attract new talent and be proactive in going to the college universities and looking there first to bring them on, because our industry is changing so much in innovation. I'm going to say you go and get in somebody 40 plus, and we're innovating so much that you probably need to go younger anyway by default.
Sure.
And
so
SubOptic,
it's not rocket science.
And SubOptic, much to SubOptic Association's credit, they're really, look, I was actually a little bit stunned when we said we're going to start SubOptic with 2 working groups. And I thought, well, the thing I'm interested in is it's never going to be about optical. It's going to be about marine. I give SubOptic a tremendous amount of vision for understanding that this is a pressing issue within our industry. And if you're not a member of SubOptic and you are thinking about it, as we're all discussing, this is the #1 issue within our industry. If you don't support SubOptic and really pushing forward on this initiative, that's a problem. So we really do need everyone to get involved in that and to participate so that we can really have a comprehensive discussion and a real understanding of where we are and where we need to get to and who can help participate in that.
Bruce?
But I think it's also about investing in your existing talent as well. I think sometimes we're guilty of being penny wise, pound stupid. There was a comment on one of the earlier panels about repairing high fibre count cables. Well, actually, it's quite a straightforward thing to do, and the ship operators, suppliers, are actually quite advanced in that. Where we are let down, and this is one of the things that just absolutely staggers me, we get a lot of the carriers pay a significant amount of money for ships, and we'll come to do a repair. And the first thing that happens is the guys in the cable landing station, new guys, haven't had the training, you haven't invested in your people. First thing you get is the the deer in the headlights syndrome, and you're delayed because nobody in the cable landing station knows what to do when it comes to testing.
And
so we've
or even give us confidence they powered down a cable.
Absolutely,
We're not grabbing it.
Yeah, absolutely. And you could be paying $50,000-$60,000 a day for ship. So every hour you lose costs you money.
But
Right.
I do think.
But the cable station's not on the critical path, for the record, just for you to know.
Just switching topics a little bit. I think there have been so many challenges industries that we've kicked forward. I'm passionate about the people side, but to me, an example of a problem we've kicked forward continuously where no one is happy would be maintenance, right? The cable owners think maintenance is too expensive. The maintenance providers, I think sitting on this stage, we probably have 70% of the kilometers under maintenance. We're not happy, nobody's happy, but collectively we've never figured out how to fix it. We've made little tweaks here, little tweaks there. We've never figured out how to fix it. And what does that mean long term? You see the older ships rolling into maintenance. They're the ones that are going to roll out first. There's a handful of years left on these contracts. You look at different contracts. There's, including our private maintenance. There's a handful of years left. Call it 5 or so. We have to figure out this problem in the next big go around, because when nobody's happy and nothing changes, that's a pure sign of stagnation.
We, as a Global Marine, we'd love to innovate. We'd love to innovate on the vessel side. I don't have a single customer who comes to me and says, what can you do differently with ships? Can you burn less fuel, save me money? Well, absolutely. I could do that, but I need to be able to invest in that tonnage. I need a reason to invest in that tonnage. I need to be able to convince my shareholders, a $70-80 million investment is worth backing, and they're going to get that return. But I don't have a single customer who comes to me and asks how I'm going to innovate on the vessel side.
Yeah, so I think that's the people, that's a huge challenge for us. But the business model and maintenance is the first one that's going to hit the wall. That's a challenge for us. Can we collectively come together and figure out what is a different model where everybody gets what they want and sees value?
Training the talent for sure, also for operator like us, service provider like us are facing every day. I mean, after we train, how we keep them is another story, right? I mean, the difference, for example, between training a NOC engineer is much more easier. We just put the people first graduate in the NOC for 2 years, 3 years, and then they learn. But on the other hand, if you look at the submarine cable systems, right, they need to know the submarine cable itself, the repeater, the ship, cable landing station, and a lot of them are not in that particular country. They need overseas experience. So I think there's really an urgent need that we need collectively to have a program to train them. Otherwise, it's very, very difficult.
Well, for us, it's been new entrants, right? Yeah. So I mentioned that we have a partner we've brought in now that's a very large international company. The reason we reached out to them is we needed somebody, as we kept being asked by some of the system suppliers, like, do more turnkey, do more turnkey. We want you to take on more and more of the work. We're starting to take on all preventative maintenance now, all site work, all permitting, and operations. We keep getting asked every day as the cable design builder for the cable station and the data centers, can you guys operate? Right? So, because exactly that problem that you're having, right? No one's there to operate the hybrid cables. Now it's a hybrid cable station and data center. So the person just got even more difficult to find. So I think we're going to find that some of the businesses that we have to change. And we're going to have to take on more scope. And we're going to have to bring in other partners from other industries in order to do that have bigger bank balances than we do and have more resources because they're just in other industries, right? So if you're not making enough, and if you're only solely in this industry and your margins are small, where are you going to get money to actually invest? We have to find more diverse partnerships with people that have cash to spend, that see. By the way, people put money, I'm very into prefab in general, as you guys know, like very into it. So I don't know if you recognize this, but Amazon and Google and all these big companies are actually putting money into prefabricated housing at the moment. Not because they love the fact it's housing, but they want to aggregate all their technology one day in the largest possible thing, which is probably going to be a high-rise building, right? So we've got to reach out and start looking to other partnerships to see long-term value, to see who's got the longest game play, and how do we bring them in? Because although it's not really exciting in my business, by the way, I'm not a huge company that a $30 billion company would want to start partnering with me. But I'm an entree into lots of worlds with other very big companies. That's a footprint. And if you learn about upmarket elitism, like I'm sort of chipping away at the bottom. And we need long game visionaries to understand where the small companies can go here and where we can morph some of the larger companies and what skill set they should stay and hang on to. But we need the freedom to do that in this procurement methodology, right? It can't be that you just shove down all the responsibility on one team. It just won't work anymore.
Very good. We are almost at the end of our panel, and I'm sure that we have tons of other things that we could jump into. But what I'd like to do is briefly open up the floor to the audience to see if you guys have any questions for our esteemed panelists. Robert?
No. No. I think it's working out. My question is about the human capital thing, about recruiting people, making it attractive. Every year, I live in Atlanta, so we have a very good university here called Georgia Tech. And every year they have a technology day, and when I'm in town, I usually go. And I find it interesting when I talk to the young people there who are in school. They're all interested in glamours about things like applications, security, mobility. When I talk about optical to them, they're going to go like, you know, they fog over. And submarine cables, they really fog over. So I think if we're going to do this, we need a marketing thing that makes it attractive to explain what this hidden industry is that exists. I mean, people still think that most communications happen by satellites. So we've got to make it attractive to the young people. I think all the great ideas up there, I think the idea of a university that Ballet has is great. But we need to come up with other things to market our industry so young people will be attracted to it. I mean, we talked about, I think Mark Enright made the point earlier when he was on the panel, that that what happened with the downturn was investment went other places like mobility. It's more attractive. It's more attractive to be in mobility and applications than it is in...
Sure, apps is cool.
Yeah, so I mean, that's a thought.
So I think one of the things that's coming out of this is that as an industry, we need to make sure that we perhaps build like an outreach program or something where we can go globally and promote the industry. We talked about that with government so that they understand how important this is, but we're not talking about people. Does anybody in the audience or their companies have an outreach program to attract people to our subsea industry? Please.
Sure. So actually, I'm Marianne Garden, and I'm with SubCom. I'm with David. I just wanted to let everyone know we are very engaged in this topic of diversity and inclusion. We have a WIN program, which is Women in Networking. We also have a young professionals program. We have a university outreach internship program. We have a small business subcontracting plan. We have a supplier diversity commitment where we actually look to have suppliers that are committed to diversity and social inclusion. And we also participate in the Governor STEM Scholars Program. And what the Governor STEM Scholars Program is, they take the best and brightest students across New Jersey, and it's one of the most diverse groups you'll ever see. It's awesome. And they take them and they partner with industry. SubCom is one of their partners, and they provide programs. For example, they have the equivalent of like a speed dating program. It's speed networking, where they have industry professionals come in, and the kids get to go from table to table and interview the individuals about what they do. These are kids in high school. We are reaching kids in high school through this program, explaining to them about undersea, and it's been extremely enthusiastic. Their responses have been very enthusiastic. Like, wow, we didn't even know about this, but we are out there educating these high school kids of New Jersey about the fact that undersea cable is a great industry. We are also judges in their senior projects, and we participate very heavily in that program. I just want to make sure that.
Yeah, very cool. Thank you, thank you. We need more of those. Can we carbon copy your programs?
Well, what we say at our business, by the way, just, Robert, just, your son is actually on our committee. He's under 35, African American, also looking to come back and be in a position in this company. So he's a great guy, and I'm about getting kids jobs. So if you want to hire him, he's looking for a job. But I would say this: what we say at our company is we build the internet. That's what we say to new people. We have 40% women at our company. We do have people under 35, and when people come and say, "What do you do for a living?" we say we build the internet. So we do need a little bit of a marketing hook in our diversity and inclusion. I agree with you. And by the way, we should be falling over ourselves to keep your son in our industry. The same thing when women send me their resumes and say, I'm not with this company anymore. You know, how do I, like, who do you know that can get me a job? That's actually, you know, we need to be about resource mining and keeping these people that are here, like, and taking care of them, as Bruce said. Like, it's about, you know, creating our own talent pools as well. But good on you, SubCom, by the way. Jersey strong, you know.
So in addition to these topics, at the upcoming SubOptic 2019 conference, we're actually going to have roundtables where you have people from the industry that are going to stay there, focus on very specific subjects. So I'm going to ask Alice Shelton to come up in a little bit to present to us those 16 roundtables. Before I do that, though, are there any other questions from the audience? Anything else you'd like to ask for panelists?
Over there. Vinay.
Vinny?
Hi. I think this has been a great discussion. Thanks, everyone, for sharing your insights. From this morning and even now, I hear that there's a continued theme about convergence of data centers, terrestrial fiber, and subsea fiber. Can you guys talk about the importance of that and some of the challenges that you guys see coming forward in the next 2, 3, 5 years? And what can we do as an industry now to kind of circumvent that and make this more seamless and you know, cohesive kind of interconnection between the interplay between data centers, subsea, and terrestrial fiber?
I'm happy to take a shot at my part, at least on the dry side. But it's, I mean, on the dry side, to be honest, we get in rooms with people that either have subsea expert potentially, or they only have a data center expert in the room. And so we'll get incredibly robust requirements for some like $300 million data center now that they really are trying to just build a cable station, or the cable station decides they want to be a data center and they don't really know the language that they need to use for any of the tier classifications, so they just kind of cut and paste something from, I don't want to say like the Uptime Institute, but they are totally different needs and requirements and performance specifications, and we've actually not really had standards from a perspective of resilience and redundancy in the cable world. So we find that there are very disparate, and you know this, Eric, I mean, we've talked about this. There are very disparate requirements and a bit of confusion around that, and nobody really, you know, knows what the other needs. I do think there needs to be a little bit, like, the new technology is about optical, obviously, but I do think there is something to be said about this convergence that Vinay has said, because it does create a lot of issues on getting some of these jobs done, because now you've just complicated even more within, you know, two different completely types of building types, and neither one really understands the requirements and performance of the other. So it's a bit of a mess, to be honest, as we sit in a room sometimes, and you can tell we're not quiet, obviously, but so I think we have an issue, right? It's like how much battery time do you need? If I ask the data center guy that, like, versus the subsea guy, they just can't come to the right conclusion, or what capacity, or how much space requirements, how many racks. It's like they just really don't see eye to eye. And then on top of that, no offense to any of the system suppliers, then they put somebody who's really an expert on the wet system to try to sort that all out with really the people that are building this. So it's really unfair to you, to be honest, that really we're expecting this convergence to happen within an industry that has very few that are skilled in it, I would say, as we just did a show of hands.
Right?
Yeah, I mean, already there's an optical solution, there's an optical transmission solution that gets you to the data center. Right. You know, connecting data center to data center instead of cable landing station to cable landing station is the new norm, I would say. Yeah. And as we move to edge data centers, a proliferation of perhaps smaller data centers, micro data centers, that's just going to carry on. But I think the industry is ready to deal with that.
Yep.
I think, we have an offer. I'm sure everybody has an offer. I think what the point Amy is addressing is where there probably is a weakness, which is more on the infrastructure side, particularly perhaps the electrical, and indeed the civil side perhaps.
Yeah.
But there is a role for bringing people in who are specialists in that area.
Yeah.
But there is an offer from the subsea side that takes you into the data center.
There is definitely an offer that does that right now. I mean, I can only speak for the owners that we talk to. Like 99% of our clients are the owners. Actually, they're not the system suppliers. And there is a confusion of, what do I actually need if I'm going to monetize this as a data center? Yes, you can always go to somebody's data center and just have a cable landing station. But there are so many underserved markets now that there isn't a data center in, right? So they want to monetize their business by having both the cable station and the data center. And that's where it really gets a little bit tricky. And I feel like, we could do better at that, maybe. Yeah. Right,
well, as you can see, we've covered basically a lot of topics in our lunch panel session, right? And we really ran out of time, so thank you, everybody, for your questions. I want to thank the panel for being here today and for joining me in discussing the health of our industry. And I think throughout the panel, we heard several things. Human capital is one of them. Paying attention to maintenance is the other one. Predictability in terms of what can we expect so that we can find the right financing, let's say, for the new cable systems, et cetera. And we want to discuss those topics in more detail at SubOptic. So I'm going to ask Alice to please come up and show and talk to us about those roundtables. Or square tables.
Or whatever shape.
Alice?
Square table.
Thank you very much, Eric. So you asked the panelists what they're passionate about. So apart from SLT transmission technology, I'm passionate about SubOptic, both the conference and the SubOptic Association. I'm passionate about the conference because it is totally unlike any other conference, any other telecoms that happens in the industry. It's a 4-day intense educational session where all the content for the program is generated by a program committee and a papers committee coming from inside the industry. They work together, they sit together, they put out a call for papers to the industry. They get back abstracts. Those are reviewed by up to 80 different peer reviewers to generate all the content for the 4-day conference. It's only every 3 years, and it's a coming together of everybody in the industry to learn all the new trends. It's a great educational session, and I really advise you to register and come to New Orleans. I've been heavily involved in the conference for a number of years. I was papers chair in 2013 and program chair in 2016. I think there was a danger for the next conference that I wouldn't be so involved, so I thought I'd better change jobs and join Sienna, who are the host, and so I'm strongly involved again in the program committee. I'm passionate about SubOptic, the association, because it's a way of getting these working groups together, cross-industry working groups, working in collaboration for the benefit of the industry. It's people, companies from all over the industry who may be competitors day to day, but are prepared to put the effort into the working groups for the benefit of the industry going forward. Amy and Elizabeth have been explained very well the objectives of their working groups going forward. Valet's explained about the summer school, which I'm pleased to say, and I think Eve may say more later, that SubOptic are going to help sponsor that summer school in August this year. So it's SubOptic has, of course, run working groups before for the benefit of the industry, and there's a great, I'll just draw attention to one thing, there's still a very useful educational guide that was put together 3 years ago, is it now? Elaine was instrumental in this, putting together a guide to the industry, covering all the different aspects of the industry, a great set of training materials for anybody new to the industry, all available on the SubOptic website. So I'd just like to, as Eric says, mention one thing we're doing at the conference, which kind of links into the working groups that Elizabeth and Amy are running, which is we're going to have a session with open forum industry roundtables where everybody is able to join a roundtable on a particular subject, join in the debate, and potentially any of those working groups that engender particularly lively debate, need more work, will be taken forward as SubOptic working groups so that the association is something more than a conference every 3 years. So this is the list of the topics that we've identified so far. On the tables, there is a prospectus that has, I won't go through them in detail, there's a conference prospectus on all the tables that also has a page about these roundtables. So registrants at the conference, attendees at the conference, will be able to sign up via the app to any one of these roundtables that they're particularly interested in. There are technical topics, commercial topics, marine topics, permitting, of course, some cable landing station topics, some special markets, and some more on the kind of global citizen topics around diversity, the future of SubOptic, and how the submarine cable industry can be a better global citizen. Anything else to say? We hope that you will be able to come to New Orleans and join these working groups. And I also urge you to sign up to the SubOptic Association so that we can continue these working groups, not just geared towards the conference, but also in the 3-year intervening period between the conferences. And I think I'm going to invite Yves Rougerie to come up and say a little more about the association.
Thank you, Alice.
Yeah, that's it. Hi everyone, I'm Yves Rougerie. I'm the president of the SubOptic Executive Committee. And first I'd like to thank Eric and all the panelists for the very good panel we had today, I think, about SubOptic. And I hope it gave you a very good feeling about the topics and the passion we all have for this industry. I will be quick. Few messages. First, you have the brochure on the table. Please take it, and time to register for New Orleans, because now we are 2 months away, 2.5 months away from the SubOptic conference, and I encourage everyone to register because it's every 3 years, and all the topics we have been discussing here during this morning will be addressed deeply during the conference. I think it's very important that all of the people in the industry will attend. Second point, you are not yet a SubOptic member, please become one. Join the association. You know the association is under new rules, have been set up last year, and today we have, I think, 62 or more, 63 maybe, members already joined the association, so please, if you didn't do it yet, do it. Third message is easy. This one, I wanted to say, join the girls. Join the 2 working groups that have been setting up. Amy and Elizabeth, I will not come back on the topics of the working group we discussed, but it's very important. It's working very well, and I'm sure they will deliver a lot of results. And when you are a member, you are also the possibility to propose new working groups to be set up by SubOptic, and we will be very happy, of course, to help and to deal with new topics for the benefit of this industry. Few words about the election of the executive committee. You know that under the state of SubOptic, or you may know or not actually, that we have 10 board members, 10 executive members for governing the association, and every 3 years we will renew 5 of those members. So in April 2019, we'll have a new executive committee with 5 new officers to be elected. So these 5 new officers will be elected for a 3 years renewable term, that is maximum 6 years actually. And how does it work? It's easy. The nomination will be open for members to propose candidates during the month of February. That is from the 1st to the 28th of February. Members can nominate a candidate for the Executive Committee of SubOptic. Then there will be an online secret voting from March 15 to April 5. And of course, the new Executive Committee will be announced and formally set up during the SubOptic conference in April 2019. This is what I wanted to tell you. To join the association, you can contact myself or Joel, who is the Secretariat of the SubOptic Association. And to attend the conference, of course, you have the link of the website described here. This is it for me. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Yves.
So I just wanted you to please join me in thanking the panelists for the PTC SubOptic Lunch session.
Hey, Eric, don't forget, we have a, if you're interested in continuing the conversation on diversity, we have a Women in Subsea group discussion at 3:30 in Coral Sea. Love to have SubCom join. We'd love to have you come. It's at 3:30. So men and women are, actually women and champions of women are all invited.
Oh, excellent. And we have the telegeography session as well following.
It's after that.
The second, yes.
Yeah, it's supposed to start now, but I think you've got a break, right? Wasn't it supposed to start at 2?
Why don't we take a quick break, stretch your legs, and welcome back to